Family drama gets messy, especially when money's involved, and my story is no exception. It started 25 years ago when my aunt passed away, leaving behind my two cousins in their early 20s. My grandparents, who were well off, included a clause in their will. If a parent died before their children turned 30, the grandchildren would get half of their inheritance then and the rest when the grandparents passed away. Both cousins got a good chunk of money, plus what they made from selling my aunt's house. The younger cousin used her money wisely. She paid off her student loans and bought property where she still lives today. The older one, though? He blew through all of it in just 6 years. Drugs, bad decisions, you name it. He ended up back at square one, working as a cop and barely scraping by. My grandparents even paid for him to go to rehab 3 times. Eventually, he sobered up after his girlfriend got pregnant. She later became his wife, a manipulative woman who saw my grandparents as a cash cow. They had 3 kids together, locking her in financially. Whenever they needed money, which was often, they ran to my grandparents, who always helped despite how much it annoyed the rest of the family. When my grandmother passed away, I moved in with my grandfather to keep him company. This drove my cousin and his wife crazy. They started pulling petty stunts to make me miserable, like sending their kids into my room to wreck my stuff. Things escalated when my cousin planted my firearm, loaded, claiming his kids had found it. That lie got me kicked out, even though my grandfather later admitted he didn't believe it. Before we could fully patch things up, my grandfather passed away unexpectedly. That could have been the end of it, but my grandparents had a trick up their sleeve, a clause in their will that made sure no one could take more than their share. My cousin's greed was about to be his downfall. After my grandfather passed, things shifted quickly. My cousin and his wife, sensing the opportunity for another payday, started cozying up to my dad. They knew he was the executor of the estate and wanted to get in his good graces. It was sickening to watch. They'd been angling for money for years, and now they were ready to go all in. A few months later, the will was read. My immediate family and I met with the lawyer privately to hear our portion, while my cousins were scheduled separately. That's when the bombshell clause came up. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate not assigned to them, they forfeit their inheritance, and it will be divided among the remaining family members. My grandparents weren't playing around. This clause was their way of shutting down greed and infighting before it started. My father inherited all physical property, aside from a few sentimental items set aside for me. My cousins would still receive their remaining shares, but they were forbidden from touching anything else. Knowing how my cousin operated, I saw an opportunity to bait him into forfeiting his share. I called him and told him that all of my grandmother's jewelry, an extensive and valuable collection, was going to be donated to a charity auction. I knew his greedy side wouldn't let that slide. He immediately drove to my grandparents' house, convinced he could snag some for himself. The jewelry was never going to charity, of course. It was part of my father's inheritance and already accounted for. What he was about to do was entirely his choice and entirely against the rules of the will. Meanwhile, my dad and the lawyer were coincidentally heading to my grandparents' house to go over the estate. When they arrived, they found a shocking sight. 3 shoeboxes full of jewelry piled on the kitchen counter. My cousin had been ransacking the house, and he walked out of my grandparents' bedroom carrying a 4th shoebox right in front of them. The look on his face said it all. He knew he'd been caught. My dad and the lawyer immediately realized what was happening. And with the clause in the will, it was game over. Standing there with a shoebox of stolen jewelry in his hands, my cousin realized the trap he'd walked into. He stammered excuses, claiming he thought the jewelry was being donated and that he just wanted to make sure it didn't go to waste. But it was too late. The lawyer calmly explained that his actions violated the terms of the will and the clause would be enforced. That meant he was forfeiting everything, his entire remaining share of the inheritance. All the money, all the assets he was supposed to receive, gone in an instant. The lawyer documented everything, including photos of the jewelry boxes and my cousin's presence in the house. There was no way out. When the reality hit him, he didn't take it well. He argued, yelled, and tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it. My dad wasn't having any of it either. He made it clear that my cousin's greed had cost him everything, and there was no one to blame but himself. Word got around the family quickly, and my cousin's reputation was destroyed. His wife, who had been clinging to the idea of a big payday, was furious. Within weeks, she filed for divorce, likely realizing she'd hitched her wagon to a sinking ship. Meanwhile, the rest of us moved on with the inheritance divided as planned. The portion my cousin forfeited was redistributed among the family, as outlined in the will. I didn't feel bad for him, not after everything he'd pulled over the years. The fallout didn't end there, though. My cousin vanished from the family. He disappeared shortly after the divorce, and none of us have heard from him in over 6 years. With my cousin out of the picture, things finally settled down. The inheritance was divided fairly, and for the first time in years, the family felt some sense of peace. My younger cousin, who had never caused any issues, remained close to us, grieving our grandparents the same way we did. She didn't seem interested in the money, just the memories we all shared. As for me, the whole ordeal left a bitter taste. While it was satisfying to see my cousin's greed backfire, it couldn't erase the damage he had caused. I would have given anything to have my grandparents back instead of dealing with this mess. Looking back, I don't regret setting him up. He'd spent years taking advantage of my grandparents' kindness, and his entitled attitude finally caught up to him. If he hadn't been so greedy, he could have kept his share and moved on with his life. Instead, he destroyed his marriage, his reputation, and his ties to the family. To this day, I don't know where he is or what he's doing. I doubt he'll ever reach out, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Sometimes, cutting toxic people out of your life is the only way to move forward. If there's one thing this whole situation taught me, it's that greed can ruin everything. Family, relationships, even your own sanity, it's not worth it. If you found this story engaging or it resonated with you, consider following my page for more stories like this one. Whether it's tales of justice, family dynamics, or navigating life's challenges, there's always something meaningful to share.